Welcome to this session. My name is Barbara Gochalia. Today we are going to look at, looking at market efficiency. And under this, we shall be looking at demand supply and the market equilibrium. So let us look at the basic decision-making units. We have a farm. And when we talk about a farm, we are basically talking about an organization, right? We are talking about a business entity that is able to transform resources, which are inputs, into the production process, into output or the final product, right? Then we have the entrepreneurs. Of course, the entrepreneurs are risk takers. These are proprietors of companies and businesses, right? These are people that come up, for example, with new ideas of products and so on, new businesses. And then we have households. When you talk about households, we are talking about individual consumers, right? So let's look at the circular flow of economic activity. We looked at this briefly, but these are concepts that will help us understand actually, that will give us a foundation for understanding economic concepts in this particular subject. Let's look at the circular flow of economic activity. So with the circular flow of economic activity, basically we are looking at the flow of factors of production between different sectors of the economy. We look at the flow of factors of production between different sectors of the economy. And what are these factors of production? We have land, we have labor, we have capital, we have entrepreneurship, right? And then also the different sectors of the economy here. We are looking at the farms, the business farms. We are looking at the households or the individual consumers. We are looking at, for example, this is just a two-sector model, but if it is a four-sector model, we shall also look at the government sector and the foreign sector or the rest of the world, right? So as these factors of production circulate, as these factors of production are circulate, or they are transferred within this, they flow within within these different sectors of the economy. In return, they get payment. For example, entrepreneurship, an entrepreneur will get a payment of profit. Capital will get a payment of interest on it. Land will get a payment of rent, right? And then also the flow, we also, with the circular flow of economic activity, we see the flow of goods and services, the flow of goods and services between these different sectors of the economy. And of course, there is payment, right? There is payment for these goods and services in return. Of course, there we shall have the two parties, the buyers and the sellers. So this is a two-sector model for the circular flow of economic activity. And for a four-sector model, we shall have basically four sectors of the economy. We shall have farms, we shall have business farms, we shall have households, we shall have the government sector and the rest of the world. So here we basically have this circular flow of economic activity shows the output markets and the input markets. Of course, the input market, we are looking at the factors of production like labor, land, capital, right? And the entrepreneurship. And then for the output market, of course, now here we are looking at the goods and services that are exchanged. Of course, there is payment in return for those goods and services that are sold. So let's look at the determinants of household demand, the determinants of household demand. And these are not different. These are not different from, they are not any different from the determinants of normal demand, the factors that affect demand. When we talk about households, we are talking about consumer demand, individual demand, right? So these are the factors that affect demand for commodities, for products, the price of the product in question, the income of the consumers, right? So of course, when you are explaining these ones, you will explain them on two sides of the coin. You will say that when the pricing, of course, with the law of demand, the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded, and the lower the price, the higher the quantity demanded, keeping other factors constant, and also keeping other factors constant. If the income of the consumer increases, then more quantities of a commodity or service will be demanded, and if the income of the consumer reduces, less of the goods and services will be demanded. Then households amount of accumulated wealth, of course, keeping other factors constant, increase in accumulated wealth. Of course, with accumulated wealth here, it means that people will prefer to keep, for example, their money in terms of property, in terms of, for example, land, in terms of animals, right, cattle, and so on. And so here it means that this reduces the aggregate demand for goods and services, right? So literally here, people will hold less of the cash balances, but they will prefer, of course, if they are holding less of the cash balances, it means that their aggregate demand for goods and services is low. So they will demand less of the goods and services. I hope that is clear. Then another factor that affects, of course, the demand of goods and services is the prices of related products. The prices of related products available to the households. Of course, here with the related products, we are looking at substitutes and complements, right? So, for example, if we have if a particular good has other substitute goods, it means that by substitution effect, when the price of this particular good increases, the price of the other substitute good not changing. Initially, if they were, of course, we assume that initially there were these two substitute goods, for example, maybe Omo and Ariel, they are all detergents. So if they are all initially they were all costing the same price, then but now it so happens that the price of Omo increases slightly, the price of Ariel not changing, then it means more quantities of Ariel will be demanded compared to quantities of Omo whose price has increased. So of course that will be the substitution effect. And if, for example, these two goods are complements, substitutes are goods that do the same function. For example, when you look at these detergents, Omo and Ariel, they're all detergents. They're used for washing. They're used for cleansing or cleaning, right? So that one means that they are substitutes. And then we also look at other related goods. For example, they could be complements. Complements are good. Complementary goods are goods that work hand in hand. For example, car and fuel, they work hand in hand. You cannot drive a car without using fuel, right? So for complements, they have a negative relationship. For example, if the price of cars increases, it means that the quantity demanded for fuel will definitely reduce, because of course, if you cannot afford to buy a car, how will you be able to buy fuel, right? So with complements, they have a negative relationship. Then the tastes and preferences of households. When we talk about households here, we are talking about individual consumers. So of course, keeping other factors constant, if the tastes and preferences about certain goods and services are in favor of those goods and services, then of course more of those goods and services will be demanded, compared to when those tastes and preferences are in disfavor of those goods and services. Then households' expectation about future income, expectations, right? So with the households' expectations about future income, wealth, and prices, for example, if in terms of, for example, prices, if individuals, if consumers expect that prices, that the price of a particular good will increase in future, then it means that in the initial stages, or initially, or currently, they are going to demand more goods. Are we together? Because of course it will be cheaper. They will be cheaper today than tomorrow when these prices are expected to increase, right? So I believe for those of us that have done microeconomics, we are just repeating concepts. Of course, we know that microeconomics is key and it's a foundation for this particular course because we need its knowledge. We need knowledge about microeconomics to be able to understand more of these concepts in this particular subject, right? So let's look at quantity demanded. Quantity demanded, we are basically looking at in terms of amount of a particular good or service that consumers are willing to buy at a given price in a given period of time, of course, keeping other factors constant. So of course, according to the law of demand, the quantity demanded depends on price according to the law of demand. Then we have what we call a demand schedule. A demand schedule is simply, a schedule is a table. A demand schedule is simply a table showing how much of a commodity, how much of a product, how much of a service is demanded, right? At corresponding prices at different prices. For example, here in this particular table, in this demand schedule, we realize that if this is Anna's demand schedule for telephone calls, then it means that for example, at $0.5, Anna demands, makes, for example, or makes 25 calls for $0.5, and at $3.5, Anna makes 7 calls. So that's what a demand schedule is, simply a table showing quantities of a product or service that are demanded at corresponding prices. Then a demand curve will actually be a graphical illustration of these figures in the demand schedule or in the demand table, right? So I hope we can distinguish between the two. The demand curve is simply a graph plotted for these representing figures, corresponding figures. Of course, here with the demand curve, it will be the price against the quantity demanded. It will be the price against the quantity demanded. And of course, here it will be representing the law of demand. It will be representing the law of demand. So this is how a normal demand curve, looks like. It is a negative, it is downward sloping, and it has a negative slope, right? So that slope is a negative slope, and the demand curve is downward sloping. Here on the vertical axis, it will have price along it, and along the x-axis, it will have the quantity demanded. Literally explaining the law of demand, which says that keeping other factors constant, the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded, and the lower the price, the higher the quantity demanded. Or you can simply say that the law of demand states that there is a negative relationship between price of a commodity or service and the quantity demanded for that product or service. All right. So this demand curve shows what we call, it illustrates what we call the law of diminishing marginal utility. The law of, it is one of the reasons it's a downward sloping is because of the law of diminishing marginal utility. And the law of diminishing marginal utility states that as more and more units of a commodity are consumed, extra satisfaction derived from consumption of that commodity will reduce. The law of diminishing marginal utility states that as more and more units of a commodity are consumed, extra satisfaction derived from consumption of that commodity will reduce. Simply, literally meaning that, for example, that if, for example, someone was thirsty, right? If I was thirsty and maybe I went and bought a bottle of soda and took it and felt that I've not quenched the thirst, I'll buy the second bottle of soda. By the time, for example, I may even I may finish the second one and even buy the third bottle. But you may find that by the time I'm taking the third bottle, I may not even finish it because I would have gotten satisfied, right? So it means that as the more I took this soda, the more I was able to reach satisfaction, the more I was able to quench my thirst. And I reached a moment whereby I could not take any more soda because I've already quenched my thirst. So if I'm already satisfied and I continue to take this soda, I might even vomit. I'm already satisfied. I will not feel like taking any more. I'll be I think I would be what they call, I'm already full, right? So that's what the law means, that the more you take the more you consume a commodity, you reach a time whereby you're satisfied and you're no longer able to take more units of that. The more you take those units, then your marginal utility, your extra satisfaction derived from consumption of that commodity, you will reduce. You no longer need to take any more sodas in this particular perspective or example. So let's look at the difference between income and wealth. Let's look at the difference between income and wealth. Is there any difference? Right? I know some of us are reading. The difference between income and wealth. Is there any difference? Yeah, there is a difference. So income is basically an earning. Income is basically, I should say, payment. Income is a payment to factor of production, right? Income is a payment. For example, we realize that if labor is a factor of production, isn't it? We know those factors of production: land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, right? So for example, if we looked at labor, right? We know that some of us, for example, are employed somewhere. We are working for some companies or organization, but at the end of the month, you are paid a salary, right? You are paid a salary. It could be a salary, or it could even be a wage if it's on a daily basis, for example, right? So we know that the payment to labor is what? Is wage. We know that the payment to land is rent. The payment to entrepreneurship is profit, right? So income is a payment to the factor of production. I'm earning an income. I'm earning a salary. Salary is an income, right? Rent is an income you're earning from maybe your real house estates, right? Or your rented houses that you're renting out, right? Then wealth, for it actually, it is the total value of what households own minus what they owe. So wealth is owned. For example, you can say that if you're having animals, you're having land, you're having a land, isn't it? So that can be wealth. Are we together? But of course, wealth is in terms of, can be in terms of assets, right? For example, if you own land, you own houses, you own animals, that can be wealth, right? So that is the distinct difference between income and wealth. Let's look at goods, right? Yes. Yes.
How about allowance? Do we?
What kind of allowance? At what place? Of course, that one is that one is within, that one is within your salary payments. Let me call it allowance, call it
like
at the end of the day, it's a payment to the work, to what you have worked for. Than earning. Whether they are calling it allowance, whether they are calling it wage, at the end of the day, you have worked for it, because there is no allowance that they are going to give you when you have not worked for it. At the end of the day, it is all within that equation of salary or wage. Are we together? So let's look at what we mean by normal goods. A normal good, a normal good. A normal good. So a normal good is a good whose demand increases as the income of a consumer increases. So with a normal good, there is a positive relationship between income and the quantity demanded of that good. As the income of a consumer increases, even the quantity demanded of a particular good increases for that particular good. So in that scenario, that good will be called a normal good. Whereas for an inferior good, it's an opposite, right? For an inferior good, there is a negative relationship between the income of a consumer and the quantity demanded of that particular good, right? So with the inferior goods, when the income for an inferior good, when the income of a consumer increases, the quantity for that particular good will reduce, right? So, and again, I cannot tell you that this particular kind of good is an inferior good, no, because inferior good, what is inferior to you might not be inferior to me. For example, in terms of delicacies, some of the people look at posho as an inferior kind of food, isn't it? But you find that for other people, food, especially when you go to Kenya, you find that for them, posho is actually their favorite. They call it ugali. It's their favorite. But when you come here to in our country here, actually posho is we think posho is food for the school going children, or for the learners, basically school going children, or for the prisoners. So one man's meat is another man's poison, right? But with the inferior goods, we have to know that as the income of a consumer increases, the quantity demanded for that good reduces. Then we've already looked at what substitutes are. These are goods that have similar functions. Yeah, for example, you can replace that good for another. You can replace Colgate for Close-Up, right? You can replace butter for what? For butter for jam, right? So those are substitutes. Then complements, right? With perfect substitutes, they're totally identical products. And with the complements, we've already seen that complements, they work hand in hand, or they go together, and they have substitutes have a negative relationship, right? Whereas complements have substitutes have a positive relationship, right? In terms of the price and the quantity demanded for the two commodities, whereas complements have a negative relationship between those two commodities in terms of the price and the quantity demanded for the two corresponding products. Let's look at the shift in the shift of demand versus the movement along the demand curve. The shift of demand versus the movement along the demand curve. So there is what we call a change in demand and a change in the quantity demanded. A change in demand and a change in the quantity demanded. So a shift of demand is a change in demand. A change in demand, a change in demand basically involves the change in demand basically involves the shift of the demand curve either to the left or to the right due to non-price factors that affect demand. The shift or the change in demand is given by means there is a shift of the demand curve either to the left or to the right due to the non-price factors that affect demand. What are the non-price factors that affect demand? Or the factors that affect demand excluding price, Then the movement along the demand curve is basically the change in the quantity demanded, the change in the quantity demanded. For the change in the quantity demanded, actually it explains the law of demand. So basically it will be, you will draw the normal demand curve that explains the law of demand, and it would simply be the movement along the demand curve due to the change in price. So the change in quantity demanded is as a result of price is the only determining factor for the change in the quantity demanded, whereas for the change in demand, it is the non-price factors that lead to the shift of the demand curve either to the left or to the right. So the demand curve, when the demand curve shifts it to the right here, like here, it has shifted to the right there, it means that is an increase. Here it is an increase in demand, When the demand curve shifts to the left or inwards, it means that is a decrease in demand, right? So the change in demand can either be an increase in demand or a decrease in demand. So at that particular graph there, we are seeing a change in demand, which is basically an increase in demand, which is illustrated by the shift of the demand curve to the right or outwards. So the change in the quantity demanded, you will draw the normal. The change in the quantity demanded is this normal demand curve here. You draw the normal demand curve that explains the law of demand, where we have price on the x-axis and quantity demanded on the y-axis. So the change in demand practically is the movement along the demand curve. In other words, it shows, yeah, I should say the changes. I didn't want to use the same word, but it shows the variations or the changes in the quantity demanded, right, as a result of the change in the price. For example, here we realize that when the price reduced from P0 to P1, the quantity demanded increased from Q0 to Q1. It could also be that when the price increased from maybe P0 to P1, then the quantity demanded reduced, right? So practically that is the change in the quantity demanded, and the change in the demand. We have seen what it means with the change in demand. It will be the shift of the demand curve either to the left or to the right due to the non-price factors. So with the change in demand, it is caused by the non-price factors that affect demand. What are the non-price factors that affect demand? Are all those other factors that affect demand that you have looked at, excluding price, right? Whereas with the change in the quantity demanded, it is only the price which is the determining factor. It is only price that is influencing, or that is leading to the change in the amounts of a particular commodity or service that is consumed by the consumer. So in all this, we are assuming that it is a normal good, right? In all these, we are assuming that it is a normal good, right? Where we have seen that, in terms of income for a normal good, as the income increases, the consumer's income increases, the quantity demanded will also increase, right? Whereas for an inferior good, as the income of the consumer increases, the quantity demanded will reduce. So for example, the change in demand can be due to the income of the consumer. Of course, there are other non-price factors: income of the consumer, tastes and preferences, weather factors, population, the quality of the product. But of course, excluding price of related products, but of course, excluding price as a factor. All right. So we have what we call individual demand, individual household demand, and the market demand. The individual demand will just be, of course, we know that demand is the desire for a good or service backed by the ability to pay for it. Demand is a desire for a good or service backed by the ability to pay for it. If the consumer is if the consumer would like to take to consume a particular commodity, but he or she does not have the ability to pay for that commodity or the willingness to pay for that commodity, for demand to be, for us to have to call it demand, the consumer must have the willingness to pay for a commodity that they would like to consume. They must have the willingness to pay for the good or commodity, or for a good or service that they would like to consume, right? But if the willingness to pay is not there, that is not demand, that is simply a wish, right? Then the market demand will be a summation, or an aggregate or a total of a number of individual household demands, right? So we assume consumer 1 has demand for this particular good X, consumer 2 has demand for good X, consumer 3 has demand for good Y, and then we add the total demand. It's like people taking orders, people entering into a restaurant, and all of them are ordering for the same type of food. So we shall add the total amount of food that all of them have ordered for. If they have all ordered for 10 kilos of food, then that will be the of course, we are looking at it in an aggregated kind of form, right? At market level, right? Where we are aggregating individual demands, right? Individual demands. So for example, we have household A demanding, this is its demand curve, household B having that's demand curve, and then when we add, we shall have a total demand, the total market demand curve, where we are simply adding the total demand, or it would be orders if we are to put it in that way. So let us look at the supply in output markets. With the supply, we are looking at the goods, the quantities of goods and services that are available to the market, right? That are available to the market, right? So we also have a supply schedule, which is simply a table showing how much quantities of a good are supplied at different prices, of course, keeping other factors constant. For example, here we are seeing this is Clarence Brown. This is an individual. His supply curve, his supply schedule for soybeans, right? So we are assuming this is a supplier, and for each amount of for each price for each corresponding price. For this particular price, for example, for $1.75, he supplies maybe 10 bushels, right? 10 bushels, it could be kilograms, yeah? 10 bushels of soybeans, right? And at this particular price, $2.25, he supplies 20 bushels of soya beans, right? So that is his supply schedule, assuming he's a supplier of soya beans, right? Then the quantity supplied, of course, the quantity supplied will represent, the number. Of course, it will be the supply curve. It will be the supply curve here, where we shall have a graph. We shall have the quantity supplied will basically be those amounts, the amounts, yeah? This is the amount, the quantity supplied, for example, in this column 0, 10, 20, 30, 45, 45, right? The amount availed to the market at a given price in a given period of time. Then the supply curve will be, a curve is a graph. The supply curve will be a curve illustrating these values, these corresponding values of price and the quantity supplied, right, in this table. So when you plot them in a table, of course, having price on the x-axis, plotted against the soybeans, which is quantity supplied on the x-axis, you come up with that, with that graph, right? You come up with that graph there, which is called a supply curve, right? So let us look at the law of supply. The law of supply, and the law of supply says that keeping other factors constant, when the price of a commodity increases, even the quantity supplied increases, and when the price, and on the other hand, also when the price of a commodity reduces, even the quantity supplied reduces. So literally, the law of supply shows a positive relationship between the price of a particular good or service and the quantity supplied So a positive relationship means that as one variable is increasing, even another variable will be increasing. For in this particular case here, we have two variables: the price of a good and service or service, and the quantity of the good or service. So for a positive relationship, it means that when price is increasing of a particular good or service, even the quantity supplied of that particular good or service will be increasing. And also, on the other hand, if the price of that particular good or service is reducing, even the quantity supplied of that particular good will be reducing. So that's what we mean by a positive relationship, that you shall have two variables and they will be moving in the same direction. Either all of them are decreasing and either all of them are increasing. That's what we call a positive relationship, right? Then that is the supply curve, which we have already looked at. So let's look at the determinants of supply. Number one is the price of good and service. Of course, that one, you explain it according to the law of supply, and you will say that according to the law of supply, when the price of a good increases or service, the quantity supplied of that good or service will also increase. And also, on the other hand, if the price of that good or service reduces, even the quantity supplied of that good or service will reduce, right? The second determinant or factor that affects supply is cost of producing the good. Of course, here we are looking at the cost in terms of, for example, inputs that are used, the factors of inputs into the production process. These inputs are basically factors of production that are used into the production process, like labor, capital, land, right? So these ones, of course, the higher the cost, the higher these inputs are costly, the higher their cost is, the lower the output will be, because it will be costly for these producers, to actually produce, right? So then the technology, of course, you say whichever point you explain it on both sides of the coin, and you do not forget to put that important note, or important statement, which says keeping other factors constant, or ceteris paribus. The ceteris paribus, which is a Greek word meaning keeping other factors constant, or other things being equal, or keeping, it means ceteris paribus is a Greek word meaning keeping other factors constant, or all things being equal, right? Then technology, of course, keeping other factors constant. When the technology increases, the higher the level of technology, the higher the output, the higher the quantity supplied. For example, if we are looking at it in the perspective of agriculture, we know that when we use fertilizers, of course, when you use fertilizers, the output, the crop yields will be more than someone who is not using fertilizers. When we use machines, when we use tractors, when you use combined harvesters, right, to till the land, right, it will not be the output. Of course, the crop yields will be more compared to someone who is just using rudimentary tools like hoes, right? Then prices of related products, of course, here we are looking at, of course, if the prices of related products are, if they are low, of course, even the supply will, of course, here we are looking at it in the perspective of maybe substitutes. If substitutes, where we are looking at the substitution effect, where we say that, of course, if the price of a substitute good has reduces compared to the other substitute good, of course, less of that commodity will be supplied according to as per the law of supply. Then also we have what we call a change in supply, and a change in the quantity supplied, right? Similar to what we've seen in when we are looking at demand analysis. So even with the supply, there is a change in supply. And this particular graph here, or curve, shows a change in supply, whereby we realize that a change in supply will be the shift. It will be the shift of the supply curve, either to the left or to the right, due to the non-price factors that affect supply. A change in supply will be the shift of the supply curve, either to the right or left, due to the non-price factors that affect supply. What are those non-price factors that affect supply? Of course, we've looked at all those factors that determine supply, excluding price, right? So in this particular graph here, or curve, we are seeing that this is actually an increase in supply. This is an increase in supply because the supply curve is shifting. It has shifted to the right, or it has shifted outwards, right? Right. So it means there that it is a change in supply, a change in supply. Then the change in the quantity supplied, like how we've seen with the demand, the change in the quantity supplied will actually be, you draw the normal supply curve. This is a change in the quantity supplied, which will basically be a movement along the demand curve due to price, due to changes in price. So practically here, with the change in the quantity supplied, it is the price that is determining the amounts. It is the price of a good and service that is determining the amounts that of that particular good and service that are consumed by the individual, that are consumed by the individual. And then with the change in supply, like we've already seen that it basically with the change in supply here, here it means that the supply curve is shifting either to the right or to the left. If it is shifting, if the direction is towards the right, that is an increase in supply. If it is shifting towards the left or inwards, that is a decrease in supply, but it will be due to the non-price factors that affect supply. What are those non-price factors? Of course, you look at all factors affecting supply, all factors affecting quantity, all factors that determine or that affect quantity supplied of a good and service, excluding price. So it will have all the other factors, change in cost, input prices, technology, price of related goods and services, and so on, but you exclude the price. That is for a change in supply. So by now, I believe now that we can distinguish between a change in supply and a change in the quantity supplied. And we can also distinguish between a change in demand and a change in the quantity demanded, right? So we also have the market supply curve and individual supply curve, right? So yeah, like we saw under demand, that we have individual supply, right? For example, it was supply of soybeans, yeah? The individual supply for one supplier, individual supply for the second supplier, for the third supplier. And when we sum up all these, we come up with the market supply curve, right? All right, so let's look at equilibrium. Now, equilibrium will be attained at a point where the demand curve meets the supply curve. Equilibrium will be attained at the point where the demand curve meets the supply curve, right? So I believe right now by now we know what the demand curve. The demand curve is that one there, and the supply curve is that one there, right? So at that point where they meet, it will be a point of equilibrium, and above the equilibrium, it is going to be an excess. Above the equilibrium, it is an excess, and below the equilibrium, it is a shortage. Below the equilibrium, it is a shortage. In other words, it means that what is a shortage? A shortage is when the demand is greater than the supply. And what is the surplus? Surplus means that the supply is greater than the demand. The supply is greater than, if the demand is greater than the supply, we have a shortage. And if the supply is greater than the demand, we have a surplus, right? A surplus. So literally means that with a surplus, when we have a surplus, the prices reduce. They will be low. And when we have a shortage, the prices increase, right? So it's not good for the prices to be too high. And then again, it's not good for the prices to be too low. So we literally need an equilibrium, but it is by that equilibrium that we attain what we call market efficiency, right? So efficiency means that when we have a market equilibrium, we neither have oversupply or undersupply. We neither have oversupply or undersupply of goods and services. Here, the quantity demanded will be equal to the quantity supplied. So like here, the way we are seeing this curve here, it is generating an equilibrium price here, which is P naught, And also, of course, this one is a point of intersection where we have between point of intersection between the demand curve and the supply curve, and it is also generating a corresponding equilibrium price P naught, and it is also generating a corresponding equilibrium quantity or equilibrium output Q naught. All right. So we've already seen that below the demand curve, we have a shortage. Above the demand curve, we have a surplus. Above the demand curve, we have a surplus or excess supply. And we've seen the implication of both shortage and surplus, right? And we've seen that we've seen the increases in demand and the increases in supply, right? So practically, when we look at these graphs, we are able to know what each of them is portraying. So this first graph, that the first graph or the first curve here, practically it is showing increase in demand. It is showing increase in demand. Why? Because the demand curve is shifting to the right, or it is shifting to outwards. It's shifting outwards. So this first curve here, or the first graph, is literally showing the increase in demand. And of course, initially, if we had an equilibrium point there, E, at a point of intersection between that demand curve and the supply curve, and if there is increase in demand, of course, brought about by the non-price factors that affect demand, literally shifting the demand curve to the right or outwards, then of course it will generate a new equilibrium here. It will generate a new equilibrium here that I can call equilibrium 1 or equilibrium prime, that will also have will generate a new price here, a new equilibrium price P1, and a new equilibrium output Q1, a new equilibrium output Q1, right? So a change in demand will also lead to the change in the equilibrium price and output. Then here it is showing an increase in supply, because it is shown by the supply curve shifting outwards or to the right. It is shown by the supply curve shifting to the right or outwards, right? So of course, when the supply curve shifts outwards, initially here, if we had an equilibrium E naught, it will generate, of course, the point where the initial demand curve, this blue curve, is meeting the initial supply curve. It will generate a price P naught, equilibrium price P naught, and equilibrium quantity Q naught. And when there is increase in supply, of course, shown by the shift of the supply curve to the right or outwards, brought about by the non-price factors that affect supply, we shall have now here a new equilibrium that I can call E prime. Also generating a new equilibrium price P1 and the new equilibrium quantity Q1, right? So basically, that's what happens when we have the change in demand and the change in supply. But these changes can either be an increase in demand, or an increase in demand, or an increase in supply, or a decrease in demand or a decrease in supply. Of course, with decrease in demand and decrease in supply, it will be the opposite directions. The opposite would totally be happening in this perspective, or in this regard. All right. So decrease in demand, of course, now, like we've seen, that it will totally be the opposite that will be happening, right? It will be totally, but of course, depending on the elasticities, the magnitude of the change in quantities demanded will depend on the price elasticities, For example, here we realize here We realize here in this particular curve one here, we realize here that this demand curve here is inelastic, right? So of course, with inelastic, we know that a big change in the price will lead to a small change in the quantity demanded, of which the big change in the price can either be a reduction, a big reduction in the price leading to a small increase in the quantity demanded, or it can also be a big increase in the price leading to a small reduction in the quantity demanded of a good or service. And we realize that here, what happens here is that actually what happens here, here it is inelastic. And we also realize here that, for example, this is increase in supply, of course. And then here we realize that also here it is increase in supply here. Of course, now here we are getting a bigger increase in supply, given the fact that there is the demand here is inelastic. And here we realize that here, when the demand is elastic, when the demand is the demand here is still inelastic, because it is showing us that it's a big reduction, in the price is leading to this is actually a supply. This is actually supply. Sorry, this is actually supply. This is not demand, because these are supply curves. Sorry about that. These are supply curves, right? So, but of course, with elasticity, it is the same story. So here we realize that it is inelastic supply. This is inelastic supply here, because we are looking at supply curves. And of course, now here, the magnitude, still here, it is inelastic. Still here, it is inelastic supply. But of course, here now, since the increase in the demand, was a bigger increase here, then we are now realizing that even that now, on contrary, the increase in supply is a smaller increase in supply. But all this depends on the elasticity. It also depends on the magnitude of the change of the on the magnitude of the change in the demand, right? The magnitude of the change in the demand will determine by how much the supply also changes. All right, so unless there is any question, I want this session to stop here. Thank you for listening. Till next time.